In today's episode of Vice Versa, we're talking about the new Audi e-tron GT, Lucid claiming they're ahead of the tech race, Tesla buying Bitcoin, and much more. And as usual, I'm joined by Ricky Roy. How you doing, Ricky?
Good, Matt. Good. It's been a good week. I haven't finished my video for the week yet for my main channel, but it'll be on Lucid and kind of the truth about them. I've heard a lot of grumblings about the company, so I thought I'd kind of dive into it a little bit further. How about you? What's going on?
I just released a video on geothermal energy, which is, not to make a bad pun, a really deep dive on geothermal energy. Sorry. Couldn't resist myself. It's an interesting topic. It's not as clear cut as you might think, which was what fascinated me about it.
Absolutely. We'll have links to it all in the description if you guys want to check it out. But yes, so let's jump right into it and talk about our first story. And that is, of course, that Audi has unveiled the 2022 e-tron GT. So they had the e-tron, of course, and this is the Grand Touring version, if you will. And if it looks familiar to you, and it's a pretty good looking car here in black, it should look familiar to you because it's actually based on the Taycan. Audi and VW, Porsche, they're all, the parent company of Volkswagen, so they get to share from the parts bin. And this is going to be based on that platform. And I should probably just kind of point out, just visually, it looks fantastic here in these pictures. I actually first saw it over here in white, which looks terrible. I don't know why, but this car looks like a joke almost. It doesn't even look like a car that is ready for production in white. Maybe I just need time to get used to it. I think they borrowed from the Audi R8 kind of multi-dual tone kind of stuff. The door pillar here, it all looks a little bit bizarre. But if you're going to get one, definitely check out the darker colors because this looks fantastic, I think. The pricing's going to come in, kind of look at this. These are some great pictures. Ionity.
That's nice.
Showing off kind of Europe.
Yeah.
And so the pricing is going to be very similar to Porsche territory as well, coming in around, let's just jump to the pricing here. So they're going to have three variants, kind of again, Taycan-like. The Quattro Premium Plus starts right at $100,000. The e-tron GT Quattro Prestige jumps that up to $107,000, and the e-tron GT RS, which is their performance line, takes it all the way to about $139,000. So again, remember, Porsche doesn't make a lot of these, so you're going to get the full federal tax credit, although stay tuned, that might also apply for Tesla and some others as well. But one thing I'm going to hold off, if it's okay with you, Matt, until another story I have later in this episode about their range. They're claiming the range is going to be around 230 to 238, 232 miles for this car. But I actually have a little bit of data on this from the Taycan and a report. So we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But a really good-looking car in black. Don't get it in white, I guess. And it might be for you, it might not be for you, but at least we have another option in that Grand Touring space. And there's not many. The Model S comes to mind. The Lucid Air is a Grand Tourer. I think it falls right into that category. What do you think, Matt? You getting one?
No. It's funny. Everybody's going to see that the first three stories kind of like there's a theme that kind of goes through the first three stories. They kind of all interlink. My impression is same as yours. I thought it was a gorgeous car when all the dark images look fantastic. And I think it's a beautiful car. You know it's going to be well built. You know it's going to be very luxurious. But for me, the part that kind of shocked me was the price of $100,000, and not to do the spec war kind of a thing, because it's not completely apples to apples with the Model S. But for $20,000 less, you're getting a car that has more range and is faster. And then if you step up to the Plaid Plus, which is the same cost as the high-end Audi, it just smokes it even further. It's like the gap just gets wider. And so it's just one of those, on the spec side, it's kind of like, So we'll talk more about the range issue later, like you said. But the whole idea of, and also in the next story, the idea of efficiency being the main part of the story, where you should only care about EVs that have really good efficiency, I think is probably kind of a false narrative that we shouldn't focus on too much. Because like when I tried the Porsche Taycan, it's not a car I would buy for myself, but for Porsche fans, it is like the perfect car. It's like, it is pure Porsche. It's spectacular. Doesn't have the range of a Model S, but it has good enough range, and the audience that wants to buy that car probably isn't super concerned about the efficiency. I think it's the same thing here. I think the Audi fans are going to love this car, and they're not going to care that it doesn't have quite the same efficiency as Model S. So I think it's a slightly different audience, which we'll get to in a little bit.
If you jump back to my screen, this is a picture of the interior. And I think for people who have seen the Model S refresh, this I think will be the thing that sticks with people. You either love the new Model S refresh, which is very minimalistic and modern with the yoke steering wheel, or you want a classic Audi. And that's what this is here. So
Yep.
depending on what you're looking for, this might or might not be for you. But I can't help but feel like this car potentially had a kind of a grand entrance, if you will, until Tesla's Model S event at their earnings call.
Yeah.
And maybe they didn't see this coming. And that's kind of the nature of always playing catch up is you think you got something until you realize it. And I mean, forget the Plaid Plus, which I think is it'll obliterate almost anything out there. So it's a tough game to get into, but I think if you rest on your laurels of being a good car brand as far as fit and finish, and you're not going to see very many of these, as many as Tesla. So exclusivity, maybe, depending on what's in it for you, this might be a good car.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. I need to know more about the full the self-driving package and everything else, but I still maintain having more options is good for everybody. Because there's some guy with that kind of money to burn who's not buying a Tesla who sees this and goes, yeah, finally.
Exactly.
I'm on board. And we need that. So
it doesn't have to outsell a Model S for it to be a success. So that's the Porsche. It's not outselling the Model S, but it's the best seller they got. So they can win, and so can Tesla. One person doesn't have to lose for the other person to win. So it's not completely apples to apples.
And again, from a business perspective, they're sharing the platform here. So this is going to be a very lucrative car. They're going to make a lot of money on this. And that's what these car makers have to do to get off the gas car. They have to see how much profit margin there is in EVs. So this is be big for them.
So to jump over to the next story, which does have a relation to this, we're going to be talking about the Lucid CEO giving an interview where he basically came out and said that they're ahead of the tech race, even in front of Tesla, which I thought was kind of amusing until you kind of heard his point of view when he was talking about this. He was basically saying from fit and finish, from the way the cars are designed and the technologies that are in the cars, he doesn't see Tesla as a main competitor. He sees the Mercedes S-Class as a main competitor, which in one regard you could say is kind of like throwing a little shade at Tesla because Tesla's still kind of in that same price point. But there's the whole issue of, as you pointed out, the interior design is radically different from a traditional luxury car. And there are people that look for a very specific thing in their luxury cars, and the Model S may not tick those boxes for everybody. So they wouldn't even consider a Model S as a true luxury car. The Lucid Air is going to be talking to that audience. So in that regard, I thought he wasn't completely off the mark, but his whole concept of they're even ahead of the tech race, I thought was really kind of pushing it when you think about maybe pre-Model S refresh, it would have carried a little more weight, but with the Model S refresh and what's coming with the Plaid Plus, I just don't buy it. On top of the full self-driving that Tesla's coming out with, it seemed like a very strange thing for him to claim. Now, one of the reasons I was really excited to talk about this story, especially with you, is you've actually seen one of these in person. I have not. So it's like, I'm curious what your thoughts are around the car.
Yeah, I mentioned my next episode on my channel is going to be about Lucid. And I saw that interview that you're talking about. He did kind of mention that we're in front of the tech race, but to me, it didn't feel like they were throwing shade at Tesla. I think he was just really talking about how they're really an engineering-driven company, just like Tesla is.
Yeah.
Nothing like other companies like Nikola Motors, who, just a little fun fact in the interest of my research, what I'm doing for my video, Lucid has one car. If you're an engineer at Lucid, you're working on one product. First of all, that's a good thing. Focus. And they have 1,400 employees and growing. They have a lot of new job openings for various positions and stuff. In comparison, Nikola has like 300 employees for everything from like a Beechcraft to an ATV to a jet ski, who knows what else, right? Not a good look. It shows you what the companies are up to, and these guys have been quietly kind of building this for a while. They mentioned the Lucid Air has a watt-hour per mile efficiency of like 4.57, which is wickedly good.
It's really good.
Way better than the Model S's used to be. Yeah. But I do think Tesla, if you look at their slides, and this is where competition for me is great, but they kind of had this one-up mentality because the drag coefficient of the new Model S, which has the Model 3 kind of front fairings under the turn markers in the front for lower drag, and it feeds the air, especially high-speed air, up and around through the wheel wells. The drag coefficient of the new Model S is way improved, and that's how you get better range, less battery pack size for the base long range Model S. And so as far as like their benefit and advantage there, I'm not so sure. The only thing I can really think about now is they have an incredibly compact entire system. So like motor, the transmission, the gearbox, if you will, the inverter, the entire package that they have is incredibly small. Tesla hasn't really shown us much in that regard, but there is some advanced tech there as far as the better than Tesla stuff. I think that's playing into the fanboy wars, and I don't personally think that's a valuable thing to do. But really cool tech is coming out of Lucid, and you can thank Lucid for a lot of what we saw with the Model S because they basically had the Air in their sights and all the way down to the numbers and the Laguna Seca laps, which they knew that the Air had completed, and all the way through the range of 520 miles. That's not a coincidence. The Air is 517, right? So bold claims, but the company's doing big things, and I think this is going to be a really big year for Lucid.
Yeah. My one nitpick on him saying that comment, because I watched the full video interview too, is just what he said is, in my opinion, completely true when you look at him compared to every other auto manufacturer that's out there. But the one company where it's a kind of a questionable claim is Tesla. It's like those two companies seem to be kind of trying to one up each other and what they can do. And as a blanket statement, it seems false on its face because there's aspects of they don't have a full self-driving stack like what Tesla is working on. So to say that they're beating in the technology race, it's like, to be a little more specific, it would be maybe they're beating them in the technology race around the efficiency of their motors, the efficiency of their battery technologies. That may be true, but as far as like a blanket statement, it was kind of like a kind of raise an eyebrow when he mentioned that.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree. I think it's best not to bring up that sort of argument. But you got to remember that they're the small guy. Any headlines and news is good.
Yeah. So you want to go to the next one?
All right. The next one is the story that I have been thinking about all week. And that is that it's really not as bad as you think, probably.
Yeah.
That Tesla range estimates are being called into question by independent tests. Now, this one, Matt, you have a Tesla Model 3. I do too. This one might either, you might agree with this or you might have questions or this might seem pretty obvious to you. But I have a Tesla Model 3 and I have never gotten my claimed range. When I first took delivery of the car, so here's a list of some of the cars that we're talking about. And we'll talk about the Porsche Taycan, the Audi here in a second. But if you look, there's a trend. The Teslas tend to get, here's like negative 10%, negative 9%. So the Model 3 Performance, which is my car, they claim a range of 310 miles, and people are saying they're getting closer to 256, which that sounds about right to me, now, which is negative 17%. And that cars like the Taycan have the opposite, where they get way better range than they're claiming. So, for example, the Taycan 4S, their EPA rating is 203 miles. And I was just in a little bit of a Twitter war before the show about this, whereas in reality, they're getting 320. And I think I mentioned this to you, but at Fully Charged Live, I had the opportunity to drive a Taycan and in Texas. And that was exactly our findings. Is I was thinking, pull over, we got to charge. He's like, no, there's like half a charge left. And we got all the way from like Houston to Austin. We drove over 330 miles and had no problems. So I think what's happening here is you have to remember how EPA ratings are established. First and foremost, we have to remember that there's city and highway ratings. So typically with gas cars, we would have that broken out. It'd be 22 city, 28 highway. Tesla doesn't have that on their website. They have a number. So first and foremost, you can think to yourself, they're picking a sweet spot, because the reality is the faster you go, the less your range will be, because what ends up winning out over 50 miles an hour is going to be your aerodynamic drag, which is going to be the range killer. So maybe what they're doing is kind of finding a sweet spot between city and highway. But really, Tesla, if you're watching, I actually think you'd do your fans a much better service if you broke it out, just like they do for gas cars, and had like 350-mile city and 290 highway. Because the reality is I have done 8,000-mile road trips in 2020, and I just did one last week because my parents live in the Bay Area. It's about 500 miles one way. And I'll tell you, when I'm going 80 miles an hour, like 85, there's some areas in the 5 where there's literally nothing. It's like a straight road for 200 miles. And you'll do like 85. Your range will get devoured. A full charge goes from 300 miles to 200 miles really quickly at like 85 miles an hour. Yeah. So first and foremost, I think Tesla should break it out and say city and highway. Because if you, like, for example, just drive around town, it doesn't really matter. You're not complaining about this problem. But if you're doing road trips and you're driving on the freeway a lot and you're never getting your rated numbers, that might be a problem. The second thing too, and Tesla's actually taken measures to combat this, is your wheels are a major source of air drag. So I have my Performance Model 3, which has 20-inch wheels, which I've never liked because I feel like I can crack them at any time. So on these road trips I've been taking, I average 284 watt-hours per mile. You'll like this, Matt. With my new Aero wheels, which I'll show you guys pictures on Twitter or something, that is down to 262. So a 10%, 8% improvement. Mm-hmm. And that extra range got me closer to where I need to be. Still not what Tesla's ratings are, but huge difference. So if you notice on Tesla's website now, the Model S, even if you get a fast plaid version, they come with the Aero wheels, and you can upgrade to the crazy bonker 22-inch wheels if you want. But the reason I think they're doing that is they want to get that range, and the best way to do it is have really aerodynamic wheels.
Yeah.
All right, I'll stop.
I was gonna say I'm the same boat with my Model 3. I've never hit the what they estimated. When I got my car brand new, it was supposed to be 310. The closest I got was, I think, 307, and then it very quickly dropped below. It dropped below 300 like almost instantly. So I think it was like one charge was 307, and the next one was 301, and then it was very quickly under 300. And I put out a video a little over a year ago about how badly my battery degraded in the first year and a half. It was a significant drop. And I used Teslafy and stats to follow my battery health. And on the bell curve of battery health, I was very much in the low end of the battery curve of that bell curve. So it's like I knew I was kind of like an odd man out with what I was seeing, but it still didn't freak me out because I have plenty of range to get where I want to go. The degradation slowed down dramatically and kind of leveled off. And then with software updates, it actually got a little bit better. And so it's kind of like, I'm not panicked about it. I'm not worried about it. Obsessing over, 310 versus, I'm getting 291 or 295. It doesn't matter too much. At the end of the day, it doesn't affect how often I have to stop and charge when I'm driving to go visit my parents in upstate New York. It's like, it doesn't change where I'm going to stop and eat and charge up. So it doesn't affect me at all. But the fact that Tesla is so aggressive on their EPA estimates, and they're on that knife's edge of right where probably it's kind of the cutoff, where everybody else seems to play it very conservative, so that it actually ends up, from a user experience point of view, you end up as a happy customer because you're like, I think I'm going to get 260, and you end up getting 280, 290. You're like, yeah, that's awesome. Where when you're a Tesla owner, it's like, I'm going to get I'm not getting 310. What's going on with this? To me, it's a negative user experience because you're setting up false expectations. You're never going to hit it. You're just not going to hit it unless you drive in 70-degree weather and you drive at very specific, speeds and in a very not lead foot fashion. It's like you're never, ever going to hit those things. So it's like in regular driving, you're always going to be lower than their estimates. And to me, as a user experience designer, that drives me nuts. It's like, why don't they just drop those estimates just a little bit, play a little conservative? I mean, we've talked about how Tesla has gotten much better about under-promising and over-delivering. It's like, to me, this is another one of those. They could just under-promise a little bit and over-deliver on that range. But it seems like they're playing it the other way.
One of the people on Twitter who, when I was getting into this little feud, talking about the Audi range. So by the way, people who are looking at the Audi, wait until people do test drives. I can guarantee you it's going to go well over 300 miles
Yeah.
with a 94 kilowatt hour battery pack and
It's
above.
going to be bigger. Yeah.
Maybe even better than the Taycan, which, it isn't kind of the next iteration of it. Maybe they've molded some things out. Yeah, exactly. The gentleman mentioned that the Germans are famous for under promising and over delivering. For years, like BMW M5s, they'd have a stated like 380 horsepower, 500 horsepower, and it was always more than that. So they kind of set you here, and then when you get it home and you're thinking this is way faster than I thought it would be, you're happy. Whereas for me, I was driven to buy new rims and tires because I was really disappointed with the range. And when I drive like I do, I drive a lot. The wheels that my car came with were no bueno. Like I had to get rid of them because I always felt like they can crack them on a pothole or something. So I agree, under promise, over deliver, and they have been doing a better job of that in general. I think their EPA range stuff, they need to, and some people have mentioned like any friction, rain, snow, cold weather, that range is going to dip like 25%. I'm talking about being unhappy in California. It was 70 degrees yesterday when I was driving around. I couldn't even imagine what it must be like for you if,
It's 20 degrees out. My range takes a 25 to 30% hit. So yeah, it's night and day.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, really quick, one last thing. If you can look at my screen, I just pulled up Teslab, which is a really cool company that we've probably both worked with. It has really good deep data into your car. So here is some just front page stuff. Here's the Model S, the Model 3, the Model X, and the Model Y. The big blue percentages are the percent of their fleet, not a big deal. The average trip is around 15 kilometers. And look at these efficiencies. The Model S was 71. The Model X, their older stuff, was 69. And then the Model Y and 3 are much better at 78 and 77. But that means even here, you're getting 3/4 of the range that you're being promised. So that is thousands of cars. And like you might have an anecdotal story about, oh, I get this. That's good for you. But this is the data from thousands of people and thousands of trips. So really, I would urge Tesla to fix it, because when people are thinking, oh, I'll get the standard range, I don't need all that extra driving, and then this happens, and then it's cold out, and then they're getting 100 miles, that's not what you want.
Exactly.
It's like my brother worked at Apple, and he always got mad when Apple would sell like the 8 megabyte of RAM iMac or like the 128 gigabyte storage iMac. Like, some grandma's going to buy this, be full like within 2 weeks and hate their Mac. Don't do that.
Yeah.
Sell them a product that they're going to enjoy. Don't sell those models where, it's a similar thing. Make sure that people get what they want. I think long term, these are great, amazing cars. Like, we want to make sure that people have that like optimism instead of, I'm not getting that range. What's going on?
Agreed. Completely. Okay. So the next story, this one I thought was just kind of an interesting, out of the normal range of what we typically talk about. There's a Nigerian startup called BreakCloud that is making an electric SUV that's going to be designed and hopefully built in Nigeria. It's a very interesting looking truck. I mean, you can see it right here. Has solar panels on the roof. And the reason I thought this was an interesting story to talk about is because typically when we're talking about all these EVs, we're talking about EVs that are selling like hotcakes in North America. They're selling like hotcakes in, Europe and China now. And, even India and other countries are starting to kind of ramp up. But Africa seems to be kind of just this big no man's land, because it's not a big motorized country. I mean, a continent right now. It's like most countries don't have a lot of car sales at all right now. And this article that talks about this startup brings up the point of a lot of African countries have leapfrogged in different kinds of technologies. So like countries like Nigeria and Morocco and Ghana, they kind of leapfrogged in the telecom. They didn't have very much like landlines for phones, but then they became pretty much ubiquitous with wireless really fast, because when they started to build out, they didn't have an old infrastructure they were upgrading. They're starting from scratch. And it's the same thing here. They're not a big motorized countries right now, but they could become that way. And so it's interesting to see not only a just investment in EVs in a African country, but a homegrown EV company. And in the article, they bring up how there are a lot of manufacturing in Africa. From VW just opened a bunch of plants in Kenya, Ghana, but they're making ICE cars. They're not making EVs, which is so backwards. In South Africa, you have Toyota, Mercedes, Ford, Nissan, and VW. Once again, they're all making ICE vehicles, which is, once again, very backwards. Hyundai is one of the few ones that's coming in there, and they're building a plant in Ethiopia that's going to be making EVs in an African country. So we need more investment like this around the world, where it's not just building cars in the United States and shipping them around the world like what Tesla's basically been doing up until these new plants they've been building. We need more EV makers to be planting roots on a continent like Africa, which is most likely at some point going to kind of just leapfrog, where they'll kind of just leapfrog over ice and go straight to EV, which is something we should all want. So I just thought this was an interesting story because it's something we typically don't talk about. It's something we typically don't see. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up and put on the board as well. I liked your telecom analogy. In the article at the very beginning, they also mentioned the banking. So banks were thinking, oh, nobody has banks accounts. We're not really going to try to open up a lot of banks and bring in like financial infrastructure for the country. But when mobile phones come along, suddenly people are banking with like WeChat and all these different mobile platforms, the Squares and Venmos and all these types of things. And suddenly like there's a whole new level of banking and transactional access that they never had before. And it's done wonders for them. So it's kind of a funny thing. I think people have neglected Africa because a lot of the cars that they have in Africa are secondhand European cars, for example. So they've had their full life. They have 100,000 to 300,000 kilometers, and then they get sold and driven around in Africa. It's kind of similar where a lot of cars from the U.S., and buses especially, make it down to Mexico after their life. It's kind of how the game has been played. But the reality is if you can kind of skip ahead, like you mentioned, and be on the cutting front of this, suddenly you might find yourself a whole new customer base. And we've talked about this before we talked about the Acons building Wakanda story a couple of episodes ago. But this is a good thing. We need more customers. When the world modernizes, everybody wins. One thing that's interesting, though, the one thing that's going to hold them back a little bit is large parts of Africa don't have electricity even. So we're talking about 20 kilowatt charging. That's very, very hard on a power grid. So there's a lot of infrastructure there that they need to work on. But talk about a kick in the pants to kind of modernize. This could be it, especially if we're talking about new EV plants that are going to be coming out of there. So let's hope that it does bode really well for them. And also that truck you showed a picture of, it has solar panels on the roof. How cool is that now? If you're driving like 20, 30 miles-ish for your normal life, and you just leave your car out, it's a very sunny place, and you could just kind of drive infinitely, that I think is incredibly key. And that might be how they get their footing. Your gas car is not going to charge itself sitting there when you're inside, but your EV might.
Yeah. I thought it was a fun story. So next one up.
Yeah. So next up is a story that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, and that is that Tesla is actually buying Bitcoin. So in a recent 10K filing with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, Tesla announced that they purchased $1.5 billion in Bitcoin. I think it actually didn't do their stock any favors. Their stock has been in a little bit of a downward trend, trading around $800 a share right now with the news. But I think long term, it's actually going to prove to be a pretty good move. The article kind of mentions that Elon's been kind of pumping up Bitcoin and Dogecoin, which are the two meme coins that he's been kind of talking about. But that doesn't mean that there isn't like serious weight to the decision as well. People kind of think of this as kind of one of those funny things that Elon does, but you got to remember that Tesla is increasingly an international company, and international business is interesting and difficult because you're building a new factory somewhere. Should we go and convert our USD to that currency now? Do we think they're going to go up or down? We're paying for costs, and the cost can change if you're building your factory and it costs $10,000 or $10 million, but then the currency in that country skyrockets or plummets or whatever the case might be. It can be hard to forecast. So a international currency like Bitcoin can be really cool, especially when you talk about taking deliveries of new Teslas from owners. So if I'm buying a new Tesla and I live in Africa or China and I can buy with Bitcoin, that really kind of skirts around all those kinds of international monetary issues. So for the future and for how they plan to grow from here, I think it's an interesting move. And I actually have never talked to you, Matt, about Bitcoin, so I don't actually know where you stand. But if you're wondering where I am, I'm very bullish on Bitcoin, and I have been for a little while. I'm not going to lie, when the 2017 bubble kind of burst and the prices came down, I did kind of sell off a lot of it because at that point I didn't have the certainty. There's nothing like time in all the world, right?
Mhm.
And so now we've seen Bitcoin be around for about 10 years, and in that time, it has proven to be solid. There are some sad things, like 20% of all Bitcoins right now are unaccounted for, meaning people lost their public
Mhm.
keys or their wallets, so they can't even access it. So it's rough around the edges. It's not an easy coin to deal with, even just getting in the exchanges and buying and holding and like hardware wallets and stuff. But I think it's a good move. And my prediction is the next 5 years, the price of Bitcoin is going to skyrocket, and a lot of companies are going to do the exact same thing.
Yeah. I was looking forward to talking to you about this because I know how cryptocurrencies work. I understand the underlying technologies and how it's designed and why it works the way it does. I understand that. But I've always been like really dubious. So when this news came out, it was just like it kind of spun my head around of like, wait, what? Like, because I never looked at it as something. There's only one major company that's actually kind of gone. Was it Square that did this? I can't remember which company. It was a finance company that
Yeah.
put
Yep.
someone. Yeah.
Yep.
I never thought most companies would want to do this because it's such a volatile thing. The values of these cryptocurrencies, especially the small ones like Dogecoin, it's like really risky to jump into
I
that
don't
right
think
now.
I don't think companies are buying Dogecoin.
I know, but it's like Bitcoin's been around forever. It's the first one, so it's like that one's probably the most stable of all of them. But I had never thought that a company would want to do this, and so when they did it, it kind of spun my head around, which got me looking back into it again. And I had never ever bought any of it, so I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy some Bitcoin. So I just recently bought some Bitcoin and experienced what it's like to buy, and it's an awful experience trying to get into this because the
No kidding.
exchanges and the hoops you have to jump through to get cash into it, having to prove who you are and send scans of your driver's license and do all this crazy stuff on these exchanges. It's like, are you kidding? I just want to buy some Bitcoin. I understand they have to do that for regulations like in the United States and things like that, but it's not a great user experience. And if it's ever going to become kind of like one of the global de facto standards, that experience has to get better than it currently is. But looking at the history of the value of Bitcoin over the past even just a couple of years, it's doesn't seem that much more volatile than real world fiat currencies. So it's like it to me it seems like maybe this is kind of the future of things, and it's really cool to see Tesla really not just going in a little bit, but with $1.5 billion, they're really like dropping the mic and saying we think this is the future where we can sell cars in India for Bitcoin. We could sell them around the world, and it helps make things easier. And it's also just an investment opportunity. As Bitcoin goes up, that 1.5 billion is just going to grow. So it's so once again, Tesla's first principles thinking outside the box. This is not a normal way you invest money at a company. I agree with you that if this does start to look good for Tesla over the next year or so, I think you're going to start to see a flood of other tech companies doing the same exact thing. And then it's just going to become kind of a normal business practice to invest a certain amount of your cash on hand into cryptocurrencies. Maybe not Dogecoin, but into something. But it's interesting. It's like I've been dubious, but now I'm starting to kind of like look at it a little more seriously.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The couple of things, just depending on where our audience is in terms of like understanding some of this stuff. The first thing about Bitcoin is it's deflationary. That means there's 21 million coins that ever will be mined. We're not quite there. We have a few more years until they're all mined. At that point, there's no more. So unlike the U.S. dollar, which the Federal Reserve keeps printing more of, and it keeps like taking the value of the dollars that we currently have because of inflation, this is the opposite. The values will keep getting higher. So what'll happen is there's such a scarcity that you'll buy an apple today for 0.0001 Bitcoin, but in 10 years, you'll buy an apple for 0.00000001 Bitcoin, right? It's going to be smaller and smaller fractions of it. So that's where companies kind of see the writing on the wall. Keeping money in cash in U.S. currency scares people, especially people who are more libertarian oriented in terms of their political views, because they think you keep printing money like this, interest rates are zero and they have been for so long, what's that going to do to the prices of anything? I haven't seen prices go up a whole lot in every regard. Gas prices are on the way up again, probably for you as well. I know they were cheap for a while in the summertime, but they're going up now. For me, though, here in California, real estate, if you have $1 million in US dollars and you think you're just going to sit on it, what you'll find is that $1 million house you can afford today isn't going to be the $1 million house you can afford 10 years from now. So I think this is a way to hedge it. So the reason why that matters is this is more of a storage medium. This isn't like your transactional, I'm going to make money and 100 times a day and, trade. No, this is like, this is my money. This is my mattress. I'm storing it in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I'll trade and transact with the US dollars in a smaller bank account, but like my long-term storage. Think of it like that, I guess, which is, you kind of have to, because it is not easy to deal with right now, for sure.
Yeah. It's a fascinating topic. It's going to be
It
interesting
is.
to see.
We could talk about this a lot. I think we need to do like a vice versa after hours. But definitely interesting.
Yeah. Well, the next story and the last story is going to be Vestas takes GE's world's largest offshore wind turbine title. This one you added to the list. I thought this was a fascinating story because this thing is massive. This picture of it does not, the sense of scale for these, that if you look at the top of that turbine right there, it's like a person would be a little speck on the top of that turbine. This thing is a 15 megawatt turbine that has a 774 foot or 236 meter diameter. Just let that sink in. This is like over 2 football fields in diameter. That's how big these things are.
Absurd.
It's insane. And the amount of power that this thing can generate, the 15 megawatts, they had some interesting specs in here for, I think I jotted it down. The yearly output for this thing is going to be the equivalent of being able to power 20,000 European homes. It's going to be the equivalent of taking, the amount of pollution it will take out of the atmosphere is 25,000 passenger cars. And the first prototype of this is going to be installed in 2022, and they're expected to hit like series production in 2024. So it's still a couple years away. But this thing is just absolutely astonishing. And it's just, to me, it just shows there's still growth potential for just continuing to improve this technology for offshore wind, and just how much potential there is to harvest energy for any regions that can do this. I just can't, it's hard to wrap my head around the size and scope of these things. I did a video on this on wind turbines a while back. And one of the big things you often hear about these is like the effects on wildlife and the effects on killing birds, which is true, but it's always overblown when you consider the number of birds that die just from flying into buildings dwarfs the number of birds that are killed by turbines. And just painting a turbine's blade black, just one blade black, has a dramatic impact on the number of birds that are killed. It is a huge improvement. So there's ways that we can mitigate these issues. Recycling, there's still work to be done there, but there is progress being made. And the fact that they can make a single turbine this massive and generating this much power is just incredible.
Yeah, the scale of it is hard to even imagine. I kind of wish, you got to Google the pictures of some of these in production, these offshore turbines. They're just gargantuan. And part of the thing is that these really benefit from kind of the economy of that scale. If you have a bunch of small wind turbines, that's okay. The blade got to spin faster. But with this, you can have, that thing might barely even be moving. You might be thinking, I thought it seems windy, but the thing's barely even moving. That's actually way more efficient. You don't want to have high speed, which the friction and the losses increase. So really what you want to be able to do is have something just barely humming along with a huge reduction set that takes that output.
But it actually is still going at like 126 miles an hour.
Yeah. I mean,
so it looks like it's slow, but it's cranking. It's going faster than the car on the highway.
Yeah, the angular velocity translates when you have a football field sized blade. But yeah, exactly. And also for the wildlife aspect, the slower the blades are going, the better off you are there. But the end result of these massive things, and it's something that you got to just behold. I think when COVID's over, we want to do a little Scandinavian trip, and there's some massive offshore turbines out there. and maybe do a little cruise or something. But you have to really have some kind of a scale to appreciate it. But and by the way, the 50 megawatt output is the equivalent of, if my house has about 5 kilowatt of solar, 3,000 homes in one of these things. I mean, it's just a massive, massive thing. So really cool. I'm glad to see that we're working on every aspect of this and continue to improve, like you mentioned. Like, we're not there yet. Like, it's not like solar is done and like we're at the end game. And same thing goes for wind turbines. The engineering is massive, dude. Could you imagine trying to make those blades that'll last, and all the deflection and the wind shear, and not just completely rip apart? It's got to be an amazing engineering challenge.
It's one of the things I love about this kind of technology. Is when humans put our minds to something, the things that we're capable of doing are just like, it makes it. I'm in awe that we can build something at this size and scale, and it works, and it will last for
Yeah.
20 plus years out in the middle of the ocean. It's like, that's insane. It's so incredible.
Yeah, all the salt water, and talk about a harsh environment. The wind,
Yeah.
that's a brutal place to be engineering things to last. But yeah, here we are.
Well, that's the last story for the evening. So we're going to transition over to the Q&A. So we'll start scoping through the things that people have been saying. And if you have any questions, chime in right now. Gary commented, when Apple goes basically for Bitcoin, just watch out. It's like, that is very true. It's when you have a company
You
that
can
scale.
flip this around. I've been a long-term Apple investor. My Apple stocks that I've had, I bought in like 2010, and I can flip this around and chew those guys out, because that $200 billion they've had in a bank, if they had bought Bitcoin with it, we'd all be to the moon. So I could say, like, as far as fiduciary duty goes, Apple, you're really dropping the ball by not having Bitcoin. How funny is that?
Yeah.
I wanted to get to a comment I saw earlier. We didn't get a chance to talk about. Let me see if I can find it. It was about okay, here it is. I think it was Rohit Sunwalker, who says, "Hey guys, what do you think about the Rivian $50 billion IPO rumor? Will it be a boom or a bust?" So I have been tracking that very closely, and we don't know anything yet. I think at this point it's still speculation. But I think people expected them to go SPAC with a special purpose acquisition company, but lately I've been hearing they might just do a traditional IPO. But either way, I think Rivian's going to be one of those hot EV stocks. And there's something sexy about an EV that just isn't there for like a charging company, like a ChargePoint. ChargePoint's had a great year. Their SPAC is Switchback Energy, which has become ChargePoint. But EVs are glamorous. Like, people print posters and stuff about EVs. So I think just the general excitement about Rivian and Lucid, I think, are the two companies I'm looking at this year. And when the news breaks, I'd look for it and be on the lookout.
Yeah, I agree. I think Rivian's going public is going to be huge. I really do.
Yeah, there's general conversations about banks and Bitcoin. They do stand at odds. Banks are centralized institutions that hold all the power and hold your money, and Bitcoin is able to operate without any central operator, which is the first of its kind in human history. So that kind of a power shift is going to make waves for sure.
Eric made a comment about Africa, talking about how the Chinese are investing a lot of money in Africa. They are. It's like they're making a big play there because they see that as a future opportunity for them. So at least somebody sees that there's opportunity there.
Yeah, they're thinking like many, many moves ahead at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched a Vice where they actually went in and they saw they're like terraforming might be the only way to put it. They're completely like upgrading and modernizing entire like regions of Africa and at a huge scale, and as a result, providing jobs. So like the Africans have nothing but fondness for these Chinese companies and the Chinese people who are investing, because these were areas that were kind of rural and not much was going on, and now there's huge bustling city centers and infrastructure and roads, electricity, water. So Africa is going to be a big part of the future as
Yeah.
far as like new talent and new emerging industries and stuff. So Dan asked, do you think Tesla will get any of Biden's money for expanding charging stations? I don't know if we talked about this on the show, Matt, but I think you're the one who told me that Biden's new plan to electrify the federal fleet won't include Tesla because they're not union, right?
Yep. Yep.
Did we talk about it on the show? I don't remember.
I think it was last week I brought it up. It's in the Biden executive order. There's a specific carve out saying it has to be basically union operated companies. Tesla's not union, which means they're not going to be buying any Teslas for their fleet, which really
I can
stinks.
see that getting political.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rodney Jackson says, do you think the EV credit will come back for Tesla this year? And if so, do you think the legacy manufacturers will even try? I actually was reading, I don't think anything's final yet, that Tesla, there was this rumor, again, none of this is corroborated, but that Tesla might be looking at a $7,000-ish federal credit for another 400,000 EVs. So with their kind of roadmap, maybe another year kind of a thing, which would be interesting if you bought a Tesla last year versus this year and all that, the ramifications of all of it, but possibly. And I think the legacy makers are trying. I think we try to cover these stories. Toyota, we cover all the time. They have an EV or two pure EVs and a plug-in hybrid EV on the roadmap for arrival here in the U.S. at some point. Details are very mum. I think they're probably a little behind the curve there, but let's hope that they do figure it out. I don't know.
Rodney Jackson said Square's Cash App makes it super easy. Is he talking about Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I should have tried that. It might have been easier than the way I did it.
Did you go through Coinbase?
I went through Coinbase for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's popular. Thank you, John Chuck, for your super chat, by the way. We appreciate you as always. You're one of our awesome fans. He says someone needs to design I don't even know how to pronounce that, Nakata generator, like in Stargate SG-1. I think there's a little bit of a Stargate chat happening. I actually never watched Stargate, so I'm a little out of the loop there. But thank you for Matt. Were you a SG-1 fan?
Yeah, I was. Yeah. Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, thanks for that super chat, John. Rivian IPO or Starlink first? Who do you think is going to get to IPO first?
Rivian. I think Rivian, just because they're really close at this point, and they're at a point where they could use that capital for ramping up whatever they need to do to get to the hundreds of thousands of cars, and they've kind of got it dialed in. I think Starlink probably would be maybe another year out or so. They're just starting to roll out to customers, so at this point it's been this theoretical thing. Now we actually, like, Linus Tech Tips did a video where he gamed on it, and he talked about how the latency is incredible for satellite based, but it is still higher than like fiber or cable. So when people start getting it, I think the excitement will build for sure.
Yeah, I got an email from Starlink because I put myself on the waiting list just to see, and I got the email that was basically saying, in time the latency will be much lower, but right now it's still kind of high up there.
Those are both companies I'm looking at. When there's any news of either of those, I've got capital ready to invest, even if it's a little bit.
Yeah, no,
I'm very excited about both of them.
I keep throwing my money at the screen for Starlink. It's like, take my money, Starlink.
It's incredible. We both have videos on it on our channels. Incredible technology. Kind of scary though too, if you think about it. Just how many satellites there are. And you start thinking about any company can do that now, and what does that mean? What will the air and the sky and the space around like low Earth orbit look like in 20 years?
Yeah, that's my only concern about those constellation style satellite structures is like you're going to have 20,000 satellites orbiting the Earth for one company, and then you're going to have a second company do it and a third company do it. It's like, at what point do we say enough? We don't need more. It's good enough.
And who makes that decision? Will it
Yeah.
be like the UN? I don't know. By the way, Kuiper, I think, is the name of Amazon's company that's doing the same thing. They haven't officially done anything yet. But imagine if now we've got competing satellites that are fighting in space to, it's going to be interesting. I watched a video on Netflix last night with my wife. It was a Korean movie. It was called Space Sweepers, I think.
I'm going to
But
watch
the premise
that.
is that,
Yeah.
it's really good. It's a solid movie, put together in all the right ways for like a little summer blockbuster type of a flick. But yeah, the whole premise is that the poorest among us now live on Earth, whereas the rich have all gone into their little habitats that are more lush and luxurious. And one of the main job occupations left is this hazardous, high danger job as like a space debris cleaner. So you go out there with like your harpoons and you're hooking up to space junk and cleaning it up and scrapping it and recycling it for money. I just, the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking, this is like 20 years away if we keep at this pace. And let's not forget that SpaceX is bringing the cost of launching down. So now the opportunity or the capital investment required is little. And
It's going to get cheaper and cheaper.
Indeed.
Michael, Matt, I'm a huge Stargate fan. We can talk Stargate all day. I have watched every episode of Stargate multiple times. So yeah, I could probably do the same thing. What is Cardano?
It's another coin. I think it started around 2016 or so when Doge and some of the other ones started. I actually don't know the premise of what makes Cardano special, but there is something behind it that makes it unique. Ernest, I trust you're going to leave us a comment that we will read to to talk about it. Like Ethereum was all about kind of like an escrow style system of transactions. It provides value beyond just a coin and storage medium, and it adds functionality that just isn't there for Bitcoin. But being first is huge in the case of Bitcoin. So we'll see what Cardano is. I remember reading about it in 2016, but I haven't really kept up with it. Dan says, so will SN10 land upright? I think it will. I think it will.
How much are you willing to put down on that though?
Yeah.
20
well,
bucks?
I will say, yeah, maybe we should do a little fun wager. This is vice versa after all. Yeah, $20. $20.
20 bucks.
Or something. We'll figure it out. Yeah. But, even though SN9 had a interesting ending, in the interest of science, like a lot of stuff, even if it's perceived as like a big blow up or a failure, in the interest of like data collection, telemetry data, all the aircraft systems are being telemetered to a remote station where all that's collected. The amount we learn from this stuff is massive. So when people tell you, oh, even though this was a failure, we learned a lot from it. It's not just sour grapes. They're really, sometimes failure is the most valuable thing. We learn what not to do from some of these kinds of things. So yeah. SN9 served its point, and I think SN10 will be good.
I seriously think it's going to crash again.
Yeah? Okay.
I think it's still going to crash.
You got to give me odds though, because that's the easy side to pick. You got to give me like a 2-to-1 or something.
2-to-1?
We'll figure it out.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob Womack, for your super chat. Really appreciate you. I'm not sure if I've seen Rob on the chat before, so if you're new, thank you. It's great, and thank you for the kind words and for joining us.
What are your thoughts about Elon and Kanye and Clubhouse? Have you even used Clubhouse yet? Let me just ask you that.
I have.
Okay.
I thought I had a notification that told me Matt Farrell is doing something and something, and I didn't click right that moment. Like 10 minutes later, I did, and I get into the room and I'm like scrolling, and you were not there. So I think I missed you. But I've been in a couple rooms with like Raj, Tesla Raj, and Ryan from the Kilowatts a couple times,
Hmm.
but I haven't gotten on there a whole lot. I have two kids, man. Like it is a zoo where I live. It's impossible to have time to have. That's where I think my problem with Clubhouse is peace and quiet. If you don't have peace and quiet, you can barely hear and you can never talk. And a
Yeah.
few times, I have a toddler who's like he's at the age where he has his hands up on the table, like trying to grab for stuff. And at one point, and I don't know what I said or did, but he unmuted me on Clubhouse with his hand. And like 20 minutes later, I go and look at my phone and the mute button was not turned on. And that kind of stuff from the UI, like it should be clear to you if the mute is on or not.
Yeah.
Write them, Matt. Tell them we gotta fix that. But cool platform. I think it has value. I think others are gonna come after them. Twitter has a
Facebook's
competitor,
already
I
work.
think.
Facebook's already working
Facebook's
on it.
working.
Yeah.
I hate Facebook. Anybody who knows me, you know I utterly abhor that company. So
Well, in a typical fashion, Facebook will probably suck at their version of it, and then try to buy them. Is what
yeah,
they'll end up probably trying to do.
sad but true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nikhil Rao says the Indian government is getting closer to banning private Bitcoin ownership and instead trying to establish their national digital currency. This is such a like China's doing. This is it feels like a grandpa move. It feels kind of out of touch. If you're not going to block private ownership of Bitcoin if you can help it. Like how are you possibly going to do that? That's kind of the whole premise of it is to decentralize the power of it. Like it's an anonymous endpoint. You don't really know who has what money. The ledger's public, but without knowing who has what key or who has which account, it's all kind of anonymous, and there's no way they're going to be able to track it. And of course, governments don't want this because you and
Hmm.
I can deal business together in Bitcoin and not pay taxes on it. And we could do that today. It's not like you have to trust somebody who's a shady. No, it's Bitcoin. It's
Yeah.
really easy. The biggest problem, we had to sit down and kind of sing Kumbaya for 10 minutes while the transaction goes through. And then we
Yeah.
see it and on our ledgers and go, all right, cool, approved, the mining, and we're good. Short of that, we can do that all today. So governments are going to have a tough time with this, and we should maybe do a deeper dive in the future with this. There's a lot of ramifications for all of it.
Yeah. It's funny how it's hard to get into the system, but once you're in the system, transferring stuff around to different wallets and to different people is beyond simple. It's just
Yeah,
copy, paste, put into send, click, wait, there it goes. We're done. It's so
exactly.
simple to send money.
To anybody who hasn't tried it, take $50 to Coinbase. Just go through this process. You mentioned there's a little bit of like a verification step required by our government and here in the U.S., probably everywhere else too, where you have to show your driver's license and stuff. But just go through that and buy yourself 50 Bitcoin and then just play with it a little bit.
Yeah.
There's some people like I think Transport Evolved, the YouTube channel, they take Bitcoin donations, send them 0.00001 of a Bitcoin. Just
Yeah.
go through the process of how it all works and how the wallets and it's fascinating. And I think just having done that, if you're not familiar, will give you a good handle on kind of where to get started to understand it. Because I'll tell you right now, Bitcoin is not going away. And you think $45,000 a coin is expensive? I think it's going to be over $100,000 a coin in the next like year or two, especially as more companies buy it up.
Yeah. I actually brought up to you before the show, there's a blockchain thing going on with Library. It's LBRY.
Yeah.
And they have a system called Odyssey, which is ODYSEE.com. And it's basically blockchain and BitTorrent style YouTube. It's this disaggregated YouTube where as a YouTube creator, I actually ported all of my videos over to the system. So if you go to odyssey.com, you'll find me over there too. And what's interesting is they pay you out as the creator in tiny little pieces of library credits. So the way I get paid is through basically cryptocurrency. It's really a fascinating open source, just public disaggregated kind of YouTube alternative that's actually pretty cool.
really interested in that. We've talked about this. My channel has been a little bit kind of it's been down for a little while, and Matt mentioned one of the things that YouTube is doing is if they send a notification, if you have a new video notification, and your viewers aren't clicking on it, and that happens once or twice, YouTube goes, yeah, you're done. Even if you click the notification bell and you're set up to get my notifications, if I make a couple of stinkers in a row that don't get views, YouTube isn't even going to bother with you. And again, they want to send notification and get the most reward for it. Like, forget Ricky, send Matt, because people actually watch his videos. And if they do that enough, I'm at the whim of YouTube. So talk about putting all your eggs in one basket. I'm going to be checking that out for sure. And the way that would work is you would take those coins, I guess, at an exchange and then trade them in for Bitcoin or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. There are different exchanges that take library credits, and you could convert them right into Bitcoin and put them in your wallet. So it's pretty cool.
I know what I'm going to be doing this weekend.
Yeah, I know. I did it last week. So it's very cool.
I'm glad you told me about it. Yeah. How quickly an hour flies by. I think we're at time.
It's
Is there
time to
anything else
call.
you want to touch on?
Just scan the last few comments. People are still talking about Stargate and now Red Dwarf. And Michael, yes, that's why I'm into Stargate. I'm huge into science and technology. It's like, that's why I love science fiction. All right. So I think that's going to be tonight's episode being done. Anything else you want to touch on before we jump?
No, I think we can wrap this up. I'll take one of these to chat. But thank you guys for watching. As always, we appreciate you guys. Thank you for letting us do this and getting your ears every week. We appreciate it.
So thanks so much for watching and for listening. And if you think we've earned it, be sure to subscribe and watch us every Thursday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, or listen on the go by listening to the podcast, which you can find at viceversa.show. It would be really helpful if you could also rate and review the podcast on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks again to everyone, and we'll see you in the next one.